Let's go back to 2020 and 2021 and 22 when the supply chain was broken. Those people who were really good and had really strong relationships with their suppliers were getting products, and those that were not did not get product. If you are the one really good at your job, that you like to sit behind a desk and not go out and engage with people, it's going to be a struggle.
50% of white collar jobs will be automated in the next 3 years.
Building relationships. There's no other way to say that. That is the key.
Why don't we start with a quick set of introductions? I know who you are, of course, but I guess for the virtual audience, I'd love to learn about you and your background.
Mitzi Campbell. I'm the Chief Procurement Officer at International Paper. I started my career 30-something years ago in a small company called Allen Bradley. I didn't start in procurement, but I ended up there pretty quickly, buying boxes of all things. So now to be at International Paper, I bought a lot of boxes and tape back then and fell in love with procurement. And then I pretty much spent my whole career in procurement, whether it be in industry or in consulting. So I spent a lot of time in consulting. I worked for A.T. Kearney early in my career. I worked at Abbreviate. So I heard you talking to Eloise, and I actually did work for A.T. Kearney and Abbreviate during the EDS years. So I didn't know some of the stuff she was saying. I thought that was funny. So going back to some of your podcasts, throughout my consulting career, I loved helping clients. Like I loved just helping them and working through the transformational process, design something that fits better for them. But I always knew I wanted to be a CPO. So back in 2018, I went back into industry, became a CPO much more quick than I expected. It was more of an interim role for a company called Diversity. It was intended to be an interim role. I went back into consulting and then knew that eventually I would probably end up a CPO and was given this opportunity. And so here we are today.
That's amazing. So here's a question, and I feel like I meet a lot of young people at procurement conferences. I was just at DPW in Amsterdam a week and a half ago, and they have a Rising Stars program. So if you're under 30 and you're in procurement, they'll give you free tickets and that kind of stuff. But they're always looking for career advice, and I feel that procurement is a place where I worry about, like, is it what gets you that next job? Is it the credentials from the previous role? Is there a wait your turn culture? Because in certain areas like sales, you can demonstrate outperformance very easily, and you can basically advocate for yourself. So if you are, talking to someone who's like, hey, I've just entered the workforce, I'm 24 as a category manager, and I have the dream to be a CPO, how would you recommend that they get there?
I would start by the end of the process, like really understanding how you go about the process of being really good at strategic sourcing. Understand the background and the procurement side, certainly, but if you're starting as a category manager, it is about making sure you know how to work that process inside and out. It doesn't mean you have to go out to bid every time. It might be the right strategy to do a direct negotiation, but know the process. You also need to understand how to do the analysis. But I think procurement has evolved, especially since 2020. Being really good at relationships is, especially not only with your suppliers, that's very important, but also internally, because that's what's going to get you the visibility. If you are the one who you're really good at your job, but you like to sit behind a desk and not go out and engage with people, it's going to be a struggle. So you kind of have to find that balance of being really, really good at the sourcing process, negotiations, but you also then have to be also very good at getting out in front of people and just building relationships. There's no other way to say that. That is the key. And that's something I struggled with early in my career, and I had to get coaching on because I'm not exactly an extrovert. That may surprise you, but I am not. I am a functional introvert.
Yes. Well, sometimes amazing amounts of subject matter expertise and charm can overcome the natural introvert tendencies. So I think that's the case here. I'm kind of curious, like, what kind of training do you, if you, let's say that you're talking to somebody and now they're 24 and they're an introvert, and you want to help them, become a strong category manager, build stronger relationships. Are you sending them to Toastmasters International? What do you think's the right training? Or maybe you send them to go work with the sales folks for a year, and then they really have to put themselves out there. I know some folks like Eugene Galdi is a CPO at Arxada, who's a buddy of mine. And if I can say that, I guess customer colleague. I think friend. I'll put him in the category. And he has a lot of folks, a lot of folks, he really leans into the, hey, procurement has to be also in the business of sales. But I've buried the lead. What kind of training would an introvert need to be really successful in this space?
Yeah, if you would have sent me to Toastmasters early in my career, I probably would have quit. Like that's how anxious I would have been about it. And now I present, in the last 10, 15 years of my career, I present to CEOs. It's no big deal. It's just something I had to learn. I think, and I'm going to give a selfish plug, so I hope this is okay.
Of
I'm a
course.
certified Clifton strengths coach, and I think that really evolved who I am and understanding how I work and how I can connect with
Mhm.
people. Because I don't really care for those big groups. Like I won't attend a lot of conferences because it's not my favorite thing to do. That's where I excel. I'm really good at one-on-one. Like you and I have some amazing conversations every time we talk.
Yeah.
And so I think I would try to understand what makes that person tick, whether it was that Clifton Strengths Finder or whether it was some other way to understand what their core strengths are and how they then can actually make it work. I know how to make mine work now because it's a combination of my themes. This is how you bring it out. This is how you do it. Yes, I'm going to be drained when I go home. I'm going to go to sleep, but I can get through it and I can build those relationships and do those. So I think you got to find out that, and then you can actually figure out how to address it. Toastmasters, again, I know people who have done it and it's worked great for them. It would, like I said, it probably would have caused me so much angst that I probably would have said, not doing it.
Yeah. First step is admitting that you have to give a toast. So it's like if you find a process that works well for you. I mean, a lot of these, approaches and assessment methods, and they have a lot of relationship, and even if they use different terms, like, if you look at the Clifton strengths and then you think about even something like, I met somebody at a charity dinner who's like a Tony Robbins certified trainer. And it's funny because
Wow.
when I'm looking at Clifton strengths, executing, influencing,
Yeah.
relationship building, strategic thinking as the four pillars. I mean, there's so much similarity, to the Tony Robbins methodology. And so, I think if there's something that speaks to you that you can lean back on, you feel good about, that's the most important thing. But it is interesting, like something you said earlier that just sort of stuck with me is if you're sitting behind your computer, it's not going to work. And I will build on this and say that I was at a dinner a few weeks ago with a guy who works at this foundation model company called Anthropic. And so there's sort of two big ones, three big ones: OpenAI, Anthropic, Google Gemini, maybe Grok, depending on your political leanings. And he said something very interesting to me. He said, I think there's going to be a lot of job replacement. I'm like, okay, that makes sense, of course. He said, and he went one step farther and said, I believe that 50% white collar jobs will be automated in the next 3 years. And that felt like a pretty big statement for me to chew on. And I said, well, how conservative is this? Because I remember when I was at Waymo, for example, there was evangelists who said, oh, we're like a year away from self-driving. And there were pessimists who felt like,
Yeah.
hey, it's been 3 years away for a decade. It's going to be a long, long grind. And he said, well, this is actually kind of a pretty median estimate among folks. And I said, well, my next question was, well, what 50%? What's the
Yeah.
50% that goes and what stays? And he said the simple litmus test is if your entire job can be done from behind a computer screen at home, then that job is gone in 3 years.
Yeah.
Because what these models are good at is taking information on a screen or before it even gets to the screen, and then taking action on it and making interpretation. But what it can't do is they really can't do anything today in the real world. There's obviously companies trying to build robotic systems that
Yeah.
are humanoids, but I mean, again, that is still science fiction in a lot of ways. And so I feel that, I think that, so the question is, what's the kind of activity that procurement professionals can be leaning into that are specifically the things that are not going to change over the next 5 years, that are always going to be evergreen, important skills, even in the face of changing technology? I know it's a really big question, but it's one I
Yes.
think about a lot.
Yeah. No, it's a valid question. And it has been, I can even think back to my consulting years back in like, 2016, 2017. And we were talking about RPA back then. And now it seems so, RPA seems so basic compared to where we are
Yeah.
today. Even back then, I used to always say, look, regardless of what a computer can do or can't do, it's those of you that can engage on a human level because you're still going to need that human intervention. You're still going to need someone that uses that human processing power you're going to need those relationships. It goes back to being able to build relationships and have a simple conversation with someone. And if you can't, and you can only sit behind your desk, you may be very, very good. And I promise you
Right.
that computer's just as good, right? I
Mhm.
don't know how to code at all, but guess what? My AI solution, and I use two of those solutions you mentioned predominantly, they know how. And so I
Yeah.
have written more code in the last year and a half than I ever have in my life because I don't know anything about it, but I can tell it what I want and then it creates it. Lo and behold, it works.
Wow.
Yeah, so I would say it's definitely, again, it goes back to that relationship side, being able to hold a conversation, be able to critical thinking, being able to take what the intelligence gives you, just
Right.
like whether you're doing it or whether a computer is doing it for you, it doesn't matter. But someone has to be able to take that, put our human emotion side to it to make the right decision overall for the company. Not always. Sometimes it is clean cut and the computer can make those decisions. But I firmly believe that yes, there are going to be jobs, and if you could do all your job behind a computer, yours is probably one of them. I don't disagree. I don't know about the timeline. I'm not definitely not an expert in that field, but I think those that still have to, they have a human side, a side that has to engage and foster relationships. Let's go back to 2020 and 2021 and 22 when the supply chain was broken. Those
Right.
people who were really good and had really
Right.
strong relationships with their suppliers were getting products, and those that were not did not get product. So it comes down to that, in my opinion.
That's really interesting. I mean, and I agree with you. Those were strange times. Do you think it's likely that we will encounter something like that again in the next decade or two? I mean, I know this is an unanswerable question, which is also nice because you can say anything and it's going to be a valid guess, 'Cause especially post-COVID, everyone was talking about risk and resiliency and, how did we not think about all this stuff in advance? But this is again a once in 100-year event. Do you think it's likely that another thing like that happens? Or is it like, hey, let's go back to lean, let's go back to just in time?
Yeah, I don't know, Spencer, right? You're like you said, it's a guess. We can make a guess. I sure hope not, right? As a CPO, as a person, I hope we don't. Like that was such an awful thing to have to go through. And for many of us, we've had many not pandemics, but we've had other horrible things, and there continues to be those things. And I hope not. But can we? Like I would say right now, I am not ready to go fully to just. It depends on where my product is coming from. I'm focused within basically North America. If all my product is coming from
Right.
within here, I could probably go to more of a lean just in time within these borders. If I'm buying anything from any other place in the world, in my opinion, no, I think the supply chain are still
Yeah.
anything could happen. Look what happened in the Red Sea, what, a year and a half, 2 years ago now? Time flies. I forget how long ago that was. Well, it's when there was there was some firing across the sea. Ships were getting attacked
Oh,
in the
right.
Red Sea.
Is this Yemen
Yeah.
issue?
It
Right, right.
caused supply chain issues in there, and so that could happen, right? And it doesn't have to
Or
be there. It could be anywhere in the world that could actually happen. And so again, if I could confine it to the borders that I'm in, sure, within the United States or North America, I could probably go lean. Otherwise, in Mitzi's opinion, no, I would not.
yeah, of course. And that opinion is a really important one. There's many opinions to listen to, and some of them are not informed in the same level that yours is. So I think it's worth being confident in that view. Another thing that has always stood out to me about you in particular, Mitzi, is how tech forward you are in general, and how tech literate you are. And I think that sort of that interest is a precursor to knowledge. And I appreciate you saying that I've introduced you to some tools. But it's even more cool to actually see that you then dive into them and learn a lot about them and are using them in your work. As a CPO, as opposed to being the consulting seat, you're managing lots of other teams of folks. How do you think about instituting tech literacy across the team? If you say, hey, look, I know how powerful it is for me to use ChatGPT or some other copilot, how do you think about it? Is it more, are you trying to encourage people, hey, like just set the mental flag, like anytime I have this kind of work to do, try doing it through one of these tools? Do you make sure everybody has a subscription? Are you tracking the usage of those tools? Or do you say, hey, look, I can never really fully trust the individual to self start on it? We've got to
Mhm.
actually just have tool providers like Lightsource, for example, that embed it. And then they just can do their work through these platforms and it'll come naturally. I'm sort of curious how you think
Right.
about it.
Well, Lightsource, I think, is different, right? Because we put it out there. We're letting our teams use it. We're utilizing y'all. Some of our team wants to do it on their own. It's an interesting concept. So that one we're trying to push more. We'll continue to expand with that. With the AI tools out there, we have to work within our company bounds, and I think a lot of
Mhm.
companies that talking to other CPOs are very similar. So even though I am a big proponent of using AI, and I tell my teams, you should be using it. If you're not, you're missing out, right?
Right.
All of us are stretched thin. All of us have a ton to do. If you're not using an AI to help with whatever you can, it's on you, right? So
Right.
please go use. We're a Microsoft house. We use Copilot. I have my own personal subscriptions that I use for anything I'm doing on my own that I use on my phone. I do talk to ChatGPT a lot. ChatGPT are really close, I would say. It's kind of, I don't want Siri to fire up, but I'm also very close with Siri. I try to tell them it's okay. Go use it. If you don't like Copilot, and you're at home, use your own tool, right? Our company
Mhm.
protects against using a lot of the sites because we are very cyber
Yeah.
aware. But yeah, I think that it's telling them it's okay to use it. Like if someone on my team says they're absolutely not, I'm wondering what the heck's going on.
Yeah, it's a good question because I've heard this complaint before from other folks where they say, "Hey, look, my company has Copilot, but it feels like it's a year or 2 behind, insert their favorite tool." Now, of course, without an enterprise license, there's also this IT policy, which is like, "Hey, look, don't put any company data into a personal ChatGPT or a free Perplexity or that kind of thing." So how do you manage that? Do you just say, "Hey, we're gonna use the corporate card to get some number of licenses and anyone on my team who wants to use it can, or is it just more like, hey, look, just don't use company data, but you can do email drafting, that kind of thing."
Right now, it's more of you can use email drafting. I have talked to our CIO about it, about AI. We're starting to talk to cybersecurity. We are exploring what other tools might we use, and I think we're moving down that path. It's a big path to go down. So I'm right now, like I have a personal subscription. A lot of people on my team use whichever tool, right? They feel, and it's all different. I tell them to use it. It's unfortunate that we don't pay for it right now, but we will. Because I agree, I think Copilot's a little bit behind, but and that's nothing against Microsoft. That's just
Of
when I
course,
use the
yeah.
tools, that's how it feels. I want to get people to use it. So we had talked about going and getting a few licenses for people to use. Again, we make sure we try it as a procurement team not to just go do. We like to move fast, right? I think most
Yeah,
people do, but IT needs to go through their processes. So we're
of
trying to work
course.
very collaborative with our IT team to get that stood up. We'll get there. But in the meantime, people can use it. They just can't put any company data into it. But definitely for
They
emails, if you're trying to, like, I'm a nerd. I love Power BI. So I use it to
Oh, yeah.
write a lot of my code that I go into by Power Queries. And I know that sounds, why is a CPO using Power Query? I just said it. I'm a nerd. I really
Yeah.
love to use, I love data and I love to use Power Query and I love to solve problems. So it's fun for me whenever I can tell it what code I want and then we actually make it work. Then I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
that was awesome.
It's amazing. We could talk about this for hours, Mitzi. I have 5 other tools I'd love to show you that I think are really interesting in the code generation space, but I know we're a little bit tight on time. I agree 100% with what you're saying, and in fact, in my team, when I get those OpenAI invoices every month, it's the only invoice where I don't look at it and go, it's the invoice where I go, "Can it be higher? Can I get more people on my team using it?" Because I know if they're using it, they are extending themselves by 1,000-fold. Now, of course, there's the consideration that, of course, like, there are many ways to use it when you're not using company data, where you're doing Power Query code generation, you're doing research. I mean, I find it's better. I ask ChatGPT things that I used to Google, and
Yeah,
instead of
me too.
forcing me to go and click a bunch of links, I just can get the answer directly, and it's so much better. Last question before we have to wrap, and this is a question I've been kind of curious about as someone who's been both in the consulting seat and now as a CPO of multiple organizations. What's a procurement team that you've never worked with or never worked for, but you respect so much that you would love to have an opportunity at some point to work there?
I have been so fortunate to get to work for some of the greatest companies across the world. So I think I've probably worked with the companies that just based on my knowledge, I mean, and I don't want to sit and name all my clients that I've worked for.
Of course,
Um,
sure.
But so I'm probably being really lame and not answering your question, but I would say I think I've probably worked with the companies that I'd be like, "Hey, these were some of the ones I would have targeted," and I can think of one of my I won't name the company, but I can think of one of my oil and gas clients that I worked with that was just such an honor to get to work with. I can think of one of my retail clients, one of my consumer good clients they were really immature in their procurement processes, and we joined them and we worked together collaboratively with them, and we really elevated their team and their capabilities. I would say just immature in their procurement processes.
Sure.
Amazing people, and they were all willing to learn and grow. And this company wanted, and well, again, I'm not going to name it, but they wanted to double their revenue in 3 years, and they were a relatively young company. And I just noticed the other day, I saw an article about them, and they actually had grown 10x since we were there back
Wow.
in about 2014. So just, I think I've probably been there. So I'm sorry I can't give you an answer, but I think I've
No.
probably already been there.
That's great. That's fantastic. I mean, look, I asked the question with no presumption in mind. It's just always interesting to hear what CPOs esteem in other organizations. Like, it's funny just as a reference point, I've had other folks say, Apple, because, there's the whole China political network complications and challenges and intrigue and excitement. I interviewed somebody recently where they said Costco. They just want to know how they get the $1.50 hot dog. So maybe it's a lost leader. I think that's the consensus at
Yeah.
this point. But Mitzi, thank you so much for joining the podcast. We are going to have to find more time for a 2.0 sooner than later. That'd
Anytime.
be my request. Yeah. But anything else you'd like to share? Otherwise, I think we can say goodbye for today.
No, Spitzer, it's always such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'd be happy to join you anytime.